Thank you so much for joining us today for this deep dive into DeepSeek. What's real, what's hype, and what's next? My name is Valerie Scarlatta, and I'm the AI curriculum lead at Udacity. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Dr. Iona and Giacomo Vianello, two of our amazing Udacity instructors. I'm going to give them a moment to introduce themselves before we get started. Dr. Iona, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Iona. I am a passionate data scientist and educator with a PhD in statistics, and I mix AI and data science and machine learning and creativity and dance and all of these things to make AI, make the technology more accessible to everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Giacomo. I'm a data scientist here in Silicon Valley. I have a background in physics and astrophysics. I have a PhD in astrophysics, but I've been working on machine learning and computer vision for many years, first on astrophysical data, and these days I work at Keep Analytics, a Silicon Valley startup. I'm teaching 3 classes on Udacity, so I've been working with Udacity quite a bit in the past few years. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk about this very interesting topic. So looking forward to it.
Amazing. Let's get started. The first question is, what is DeepSeek in one sentence?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. DeepSeek is actually DeepSeek R1 is the model we're going to talk about today. And it is an open weight chain of thought model, so a model that shows its thinking, that was released at the end of January by this Chinese firm. It's open weight, MIT licensed, so you can use it on your own hardware. And essentially, R1 is to DeepSeek V3, which is the previous model from the same company, the same thing that OpenAI O1 is to GPT-4. So it's the thinking version of that model.
Yeah, and not to be confused, the DeepSeek is the name of the company that makes the model, DeepSeek, right? So, and it's like Giacomo said, a reasoning model. So it actually goes through these various processes as it's responding to your queries, and you can see the output of all that it's doing, and that's classic for the reasoning models. But yeah, so it's another LLM like ChatGPT O1.
Great. I would just say it's a reasoning model. That's my answer. It's a reasoning model. Does DeepSeek truly change the AI landscape, or are we just experiencing some good marketing?
I think that it actually changes the AI landscape. It has introduced actually really innovative technology, one of which, of course, is the RLAIF, or reinforcement learning with AI feedback. And I think that's a huge accomplishment. It's something that kind of had been in the works with other companies, but DeepSeek actually found a way to develop the model and launch it. And they've used some other technology in terms of the architecture that helps them to save cost. So the claim is it was was trained for at least about at 1/50th the cost of what the other models were trained for. And the fact that this O1 or reasoning model is the first reasoning model that's open source that we can actually use access to, look at the code. And so I think it has, it made a huge impact. There are other things about it, but I think the advancement in the technology in terms of how it works and how it does what it does and how we are able to now access that, it has made explainable AI more of a reality. So yeah, in a lot of ways, I think it's changed the game.
Yeah, it's also very interesting to see the kind of the impact that then he had on other companies, because this thing that Dr. Huana just said about the open weight, it's new, and it has forced in many ways other companies to think more about their own open source policy. And so we got, OpenAI that now is thinking about open sourcing its weights for all models. The new Grok model, during the press release, they said that as soon as they release it for general use, they're going to release the weights of the previous models. So essentially, it's in many ways forcing other companies to think harder about their own open weight policies, and so to the benefit of all users, because this means that both the research and the weights are going to be more openly accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I agree. I do feel like it's there are some technological innovations, the the reinforcement learning and the open source nature. I definitely, and we have seen a lot of models come out since, and I definitely think it's had an effect in a very short time for sure. What do we think the biggest misconception is about this model?
Yeah, so I've been talking to a lot of people about this model in the past several weeks, and I would say the biggest misconception is that people think that the main novelty about this is that it's an easy thing to train, and so everybody can train it again because they made the process easier, which is true. They did make it easier, but it's still extremely complex. The training pipeline is not simple at all. It involves still several models learning at the same time. There are several phases that you have to go through. There's a lot of human involvement especially at the beginning, in creating the initial data set and also reviewing what's happening. And so it's still a sophisticated and complicated thing to do. However, it's true that they open the details about what they did, and so it is repeatable because there's actually a pretty detailed paper that describes what happened and how it happened. The other misconception that I would mention immediately is that this model is a very good model. It's almost state of the art, but it matches in some cases O1, which is right now is the state of the art of thinking models, or at least before Grok was released just a couple of days ago. But it's probably still, DeepSeek is probably still a little bit behind O3, which is the new thinking model from OpenAI, and then now also Grok 3. And then the last that I would mention is that there is a very big difference, in my opinion, very important difference between DeepSeek R1, which is this thinking model, and these other models that I mentioned, which is that DeepSeek R1 is only text. So it's not a multimodal model. It doesn't handle images, audio, and modalities like that. It's just straight text. And so you can chat with it, but you cannot, for example, upload images or do other things like this. If you use it through the DeepSeek platform, you can upload images, but only because there is an OCR that runs that extracts the text from those images. And then you can talk with the model about the text of the images. But the model itself does not handle multimodal inputs.
Yeah, it's so funny that there was a distance between when we got ChatGPT and when it became a multimodal model. But now we expect all the models that are released to be multimodal, and when they're not, they're disappointed. But one of the things I tend to remind people about with DeepSeek, it's a reasoning model. Most people have no idea what that is, and so they go to it, and then when it's slower, and by slower, it may take 30 seconds as opposed to 5. So, it will take its time, and some queries it takes longer. So that might be kind of a surprise to some people, right? Because they expect about, the other models, it's like in seconds you get a response. And then like Giacomo said, you can't do images and all that kind of stuff. So it's really a very specific model in terms of what it's created for. And, I tell people if you're not, a developer, or you're not working on developing your own AI applications, then maybe, you know, there are certain other models that might be a better fit for the task that you are doing. But yeah, you know, the creators of DeepSeek, they were very careful to insist that this model is specific for those kinds of logical thinking, strategy developing kind of tasks. So if you want something quick, then it's better to use another model. The other thing that we kind of mentioned about, some of the people are scared of some of the security issues, but it applies to all models, that if you download the system, which you can because it's available, and run it locally, then the security issues are not, that's not a concern, right? Because most people, because, you know, it's been banned in quite a few countries. Australia and Taiwan and all these other places have banned, and even the US government has banned it for certain branches of the military. So people feel like, you know, it's an immediate threat if they use it, but that's not the case if you run it locally.
Yes, I would agree that I'm not supposed to use it to figure out my recipe ratios. That's not a good use of it. And yes, my other misconception was I could not get that bajillion parameter model onto my laptop. So even, you know, using it locally, I feel like I'm still not, you know, I'm not getting that the full experience. And I do think it's important to talk about the difference between a reasoning model and a non-reasoning model, and even how you use reasoning models, how you prompt them is different. So I have a very different approach now to prompting with the reasoning models than with like GPT-4o or another model like that.
Yeah, I think it's this is a very important point, and I think it's worth spending some time on. So maybe, you know, there are many ways of explaining this, but probably the easiest way is to say it like this. So if we take the normal OpenAI models that we are all familiar with, right? We have GPT-4o, which is the latest version, and that model is a model that is, as you all probably know, is trained to predict the next token, right? And it's trained already. The way that you train a model like that involves several different steps, right? At least 3 steps. And then you get to this model that is kind of a generic model that can answer questions, but it answers questions in a way that is kind of instantaneous, in the sense that it immediately addresses the question that you are asking and tries to answer that question. So very early on, people realized that by writing in the prompt, hey, answer this question, but show me what you're thinking, and kind of break down into steps and execute these steps. This is called chain of thought prompting, right? They realized very early on that by doing this, you were essentially giving more compute to the model. So the model could generate longer responses and go through a longer reasoning process, and therefore improving the answer. And this was immediately giving pretty good improvements in the benchmarks. And so what is happening now is that OpenAI started this. They took GPT-4o and they made it into a model that has this chain of thought idea kind of embedded into the model. So they added a few training steps after the GPT-4o. So you start from GPT-4o, you train it a little bit more in a very specific way to kind of embed into the model this chain of thought idea, and you end up with O1, which is this chain of thought modeling, right? And so when you write a prompt to O1, you see thinking, right? There's the interface is telling you thinking. What is happening is that the model is generating the chain of thought, and once it's done that, it tries to answer your question. And so DeepSeek did exactly the same. They released in December a model that is called DeepSeek V3, which is the equivalent of GPT-4o. So it's a general purpose model, right? And then they took that model and they added the thinking on top. And they ended up with R1, which is the model that we are talking about. And so this R1 model is, again, to GPT-4o, to DeepSeek V3, what O1 is to GPT-4o. So it's the chain of thought. It's now part of the model itself. And so no matter what you ask, the model will go through the chain of thought process.
Yeah, and one of the things I like, and okay, so I know O1 is a reasoning model, but I have to confess I didn't use it much. I'm not sure why, but then I got DeepSeek and I'm using that whole reasoning concept a whole lot more. And I'm learning so much, as Valerie was saying, because when you give the prompt and you see how the model is analyzing your prompt and breaking it into pieces and getting out the most important questions or queries or aspect of it, it makes you realize how you should be prompting differently in terms of one of the things I like about the reasoning models is that um, the need for context, I think it's reduced somewhat. Context still helps, but the model is able to understand the question. It actually like goes through it and you can see it saying, what is this user asking about? I think it's asking for this and it is actually thinking through it. But when you give like the coding question or coding task, then it's able to figure out, okay, well, what it is you're asking, in terms of what it is you actually want to do and what would be the right code to do that, what are the logical steps, so you don't have to give all those instructions. And then as it is working through it, it will, when it generates output, it will review the output and actually correct itself. And I know there has been reports online of DeepSeek having aha moments where it will like actually appear to be learning as it's addressing your queries, like it's learning new capabilities in the moment. And so it gives you some really, it really does. I have been playing with it and comparing some of the, how it works versus other models. And in so many cases, you don't have to go through like several iterations to get what you want. It's usually like one or two prompts and you're there. Whereas some of the other models, it takes a while and sometimes you don't even get the output that you're needing. And the other thing is like code correction or kind of reviewing your code. It's really good at that. And so that's one of the advantages of this chain of thought model. And the fact that, the way that they trained it using, other models to train that model, gives it some really advanced capabilities that I think are pretty neat.
Yeah, I think those are two interesting breakthroughs, using other models to train it and the use of synthetic data. I think there was a prevalent thought that was going to fail and we wouldn't be able to do that. So what are some of the other significant breakthroughs that might be kind of hidden behind the hype?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a few. And again, one of the very nice things about DeepSeek is that there is a very detailed technical report that you can read about how they exactly trained it. Now, let me say here, though, that it's not really open source, right? Because open source would have mean for them to publish the code that they use for training, right? And that did not happen, right? So we have the weights and we have the results of the training, and we also have intermediate steps, so intermediate weights. We have DeepSeek 0, for example, R10. And we also have the technical report with a lot of details, but we do not have the source code. Anyway, that being said, the training pipeline is very innovative, and there are very significant engineering achievements in it that gives you large compute and just efficiency gains. One that is very interesting, I think, it's that during training they use multi-token prediction, so they make the model predict multiple tokens at once. This is an innovation that came out at the end of 2024, and they immediately implemented it, which is great. This is something that is used during training, not during the inference, but it speeds up the training quite a bit. Then they have this special type of reinforcement learning that uses this algorithm that is called GRPO, which is Group Relative Policy Optimization. I mean, besides the details, it's just a smart way of doing reinforcement learning that removes the need of having 4 copies of the model. So the earlier methods requires you to have 4 LLMs at once, all loaded into the memory in your cluster. And now with these methods, you can go to 3, eliminating one very large model. And for part of the pipelines, you can even go down to 2. And so you go from 4 to 2 models, and that's a very big, gives you a very big efficiency gain. There's also, as Dr. Wana mentioned earlier, there is this sort of self-supervised learning loop going on where they use the output of an earlier stage of the model for the current stage in the pipeline. It's a sort of self-supervised self-play loop. That's very interesting. And then there's a plethora of software engineering tricks that are very detailed and very sophisticated, including rewriting code for the specific GPUs they are using and write kernels for the GPUs that are specialized. So again, going back to the misconception earlier, this is absolutely not an easy thing to do. It's an incredibly detailed work that they've done at all levels, from the research of the algorithms and the architecture of the model, all the way to the nitty-gritty details of the code that runs into the policy. And then they also have this idea that this is not new, but for a thinking model it is, which is they are taking the thinking from the big model and they are distilling it down into much smaller models. And they show that by doing that in a specific way, they can get huge accuracy gains in benchmarks with these smaller models. So the smaller models can learn a lot from the bigger model with this technique. And so now there are versions of these models that are much smaller, that you can run on your own hardware, that have a much better performance than they used to have because of this distillation process. If you look at Hugging Face, there are thousands of these models out there. Some of them were made by DeepSeek themselves, but then people took this to another level, as they usually do. And now there are thousands of these models out there that you can use. So, I mean, just to summarize overall, I think what they've shown is that with hard work and ingenuity, you can have these new training approaches that can push the boundaries, even from actors like DeepSeek that weren't necessarily under the spotlight in terms of the stage of AI in the world.
Yes, and as Giacomo was saying, they have figured out, because of the restrictions placed upon them for not having all of the fancy state-of-the-art super chips that some of the US company had, they had to figure out ways to work around that. And one of the ways that they did was their efficiency of inference, the way that the model is actually generating the responses. It actually is very it's a resourceful way of doing inferences. They have a special technique that allows them to reduce the amount of processing power and memory that's required. So it's, you know, not only was the model cheaper to train, it's also much cheaper to run. So that's why that's one of the main advantages, I think, right now, that, you know, in terms of the cost per token that all of these other models that you have to pay, DeepSeek is the cheapest by far, and it's causing a lot of like research companies and even some businesses to switch from using R1 or other models to DeepSeek, because it's so much cheaper to run, and it's faster and cost effective, and it's also customizable and adaptable and all these other great things. So yeah.
This kind of leads into our next question, which is, we just saw Grok 3 released on Monday, and there's, you know, like Giacomo just said, like thousands of models, it seems, released every day. Like, so how do you stay on top of all these latest LLMs? Like, when do you decide to pay attention to something? How do you know when something is, you know, interesting or worth experimenting with? Because, you know, it is not time consuming to, you know, download and run these models, and you need, you know, like high performance systems to do this. So like, how do you know which ones to ignore, and you know, how do you stay up to date on what you should be paying attention to?
Yeah, you know, of course, I follow the, you know, people, the influencers, that's not the right word. Dr. Andrew Ng, he would not be considered an influencer, but I don't know. But he's one of the people that I follow, on social media. So if he's, talking about a new technique or new model or some new mechanism, then I want to learn about what's going on. And of course, I, read all the magazines, Wired and Tech World, and my phone. Of course, if you read one article, then they think, okay, you want to read all the articles about that. So that makes it easy for me. And same thing on like LinkedIn and some of the other platforms. But in terms of keeping up, it can be really challenging, especially if you don't have the technical background, right, to understand. Unfortunately, there are channels like YouTube channels that some people, that's their job. They go and do all the research and distill everything down for you. But in terms of, I think now with things like DeepSeek, it's making it so much easier for almost everyone to kind of get involved, to get their hands dirty and start learning about some of the technology involved, right? Because you can, play with it at almost zero cost. Of course, you could use the free thing, but if you really want to like start building your own systems, like this is like the best time to do that. So I encourage everyone to like, don't be intimidated, right? Start exploring, start learning. And of course, both Giacomo and I, we have courses on Udacity platforms where you can, be introduced to the subjects very gently. I teach basic courses in natural language processing, and some of the other courses like Gen AI fluency. Those really help, right? So get you, because I think it's important that you have a basic understanding of the technology, because there's so much hype and so much noise that you need to like be able to kind of figure out what's meaningful and what's not. And without a grounding in the subject, it makes it challenging.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think yes. I mean, I do follow as well some specific people that I find very useful, and they essentially do this work for me in a large part. Andrew Yang was just already mentioned. The other people that are relatively famous in this field are Andre Karpati, for example. His Twitter is super useful, and also he doesn't release a lot of videos on YouTube, but when he does, they are usually very worth the time. There's now recently a 3-hour video of everything you always wanted to know about ChatGPT and co. So it's that is, for example, a super nice resource to get, even if you don't know much about this technology, to get up to speed with at least the basics of that relatively quickly. But then there's if you want to try the models, many of these models are released on Hugging Face. So you don't need to do the work of downloading them and installing them and finding the hardware to do that. Many times you can just go on Hugging Face in the Hugging Face spaces, and especially there is one that is called AnyChat, where you can essentially use pretty much anything that is available publicly. You can use it there and test it. There is also the chat arena, right, where you can test these models one against the other and even contribute to the benchmarking of these models. That's another thing that you can do that is very interesting and useful and doesn't require any particular skill. And then, if you want a higher level kind of the technology world, I also follow a couple of other YouTube channels. One that I watch religiously is Matt Wolf, and there is a weekly news kind of thing that he releases on Friday, and that's usually it brings you up to date with the major news of the week. It's not very detailed, but you know what happened, and you can pinpoint the things that you want to go deeper into. But then also, let me just finish with the fact that there's a lot of hype going on here, and there's also a lot of stress-inducing type of messaging in these things, right? One thing that I would say is that you don't necessarily need to, be every day on this if this is not your job, right? Even though there is pressure for you to do that, you don't necessarily need to. You can, just follow it a little bit more casually. It's fine. You will see with events like this or similar, when there is something very big you will get plenty of opportunity to deal with it and understand it. So if your job doesn't require it and you are not particularly passionate about this, you don't necessarily need to invest a huge amount of time into this like we do. But obviously, if this is your passion and it's something that you like to do, there's plenty of resources for you to be able to.
Yeah, I think along those lines, I would recommend this piece of software called LLM Studio, which allows you to kind of like download and run a lot of open source models in a very like easy way. I remember like early 2024, late 2023, like building stable diffusion on a machine and like this work. But it's a lot easier now. And the tools we have to just like try and experiment with them are so much like faster. So I would say if you do want to start exploring all these different models, the LLM Studio will help you do it like in a friendly way.
Yeah, you just reminded me of Google AI Studio. I think that's what it's called, and it has a similar, kind of interface where you can try or you can even compare the outputs of different models. I usually recommend this to teachers, educators who don't want to invest their money and stuff, that they won't be able to afford long term. Plus, it helps them to like know what they can use to share with their students, and they can even very easily create their own custom LLM, because you can only do custom GPT if you have a paid GPT account. But with AI, Google Studio, they have a free tier that you can use and still have access to a different models. So yeah.
So now we'll kind of shift and talk about the future. What are our future predictions, given what's happening with all of these models being released and DeepSeek kind of moving the needle on so many on the engineering front, on context front, on training fronts. What direction is AI development or AI model development going to go in the future? What are your predictions for maybe 2025? We'll come back and see if you were right.
Oh my gosh, this is something that I'm really excited about because I think finally when the ChatGPT 3 was the big hype and everything and people were all excited, I thought finally some democratization, some access for everyone, and people can do all kinds of amazing creative things. And of course, we learned that you can't build your own foundation model. Not that you needed to, because there was enough, Hugging Face had hundreds of thousands of models that you could use if you wanted to build on that, right? But in terms of being able to now actually build some models that are really very specific in to a certain industry or a certain application, that's the thing that excites me a lot because so yes, we have the R1, the reasoning models, and they are geared, I think, mostly towards like coding and those kinds of logical tasks. And so if you do want to have a specialized model, you still have to take one of the other bigger foundation models and fine tune them or apply RAG or something. But now you can actually, hopefully, that more companies are now able to build their own models from scratch with their own data so that it's of course, will be a lot, cheaper, but much more efficient in that field. So for all of these other areas, I know that even OpenAI, they are now promoting that kind of customization, specialization. People are taking versions of O4 or maybe R1, I'm not sure, and customizing it like for the finance industry and for healthcare. But it's still happening for big tech companies. I'm hoping that smaller companies will be able to do the same, and we'll see a whole lot of different models with different capabilities. One interesting thing I learned was that DeepSeek, the company, that it was founded by this young entrepreneur in China, And he was very specific to have a large, well, it's a small company, but a lot of the employees are non-tech people, right? Because he wanted that fresh perspective, a different way of dealing with things, finding, because as tech people, we kind of are trained in a certain way and we know a certain way to solve a problem, like you put more money or more compute or something, right? But these were non-tech people, so they had all these ideas, and that's what helped them to kind of advance the technology further. And so that's what I'm hoping, that with things like DeepSeek and other models, that other people who are not necessarily developers, that they can have a say in how these models are developed and trained and used. And so it will open up the field a whole lot more.
Yeah, these are there are interesting times for sure in this field. And beside the things that we already mentioned, I think there is one important point that is emerging, which is what I would call the commoditization of these models. So take, for example, the release of Grok 3 just a couple of days ago, right? There is one of the graphs that is going around, one of the plots is this plot where is the performance on the y-axis and the name of the models on the x-axis. And the models are essentially ordered from the older to the newest, with the newest being Grok 3. And at the pace that these things go, it's essentially one model every month, more or less. And so you can imagine, I mean, the x-axis is essentially time, right? And there is a clear trend which is almost linear, right, in performance improvement. However, the range in the y-axis is not very big, right? And so what this is telling me is that there is this line, this kind of curve that we are in of continuous improvements, and DeepSeek is straight on the line, right? So the novelty of DeepSeek is not so much that it was a jump in performance. It's more or less the performance that you would expect for a state-of-the-art model coming out at that time. But of course, I mean, the novelty are the ones that we mentioned, right? It's a different actor, it's open weights, and so on and so forth. But in terms of performance, is where you would expect it to be. And so essentially, I mean, what is happening is that these models are at this point very similar in performance to each other, right? One might have a small edge on some things, but they are very similar, right? And however, there is another plot that nobody's talking about, which is the cost per token, right? How much it costs to actually use these models. And this thing is going down exponentially, right? It went down more than a factor of 50 in the last year and a half, right? So today you can use these models that are state-of-the-art models for very, very, very cheap. And so if these trends continue, right, the cost of inference will go down to zero, it will become negligible, right? So what this means is that it will not matter anymore, right? What will matter is if the performances are all more or less similar and the cost is very small, right? What is going to differentiate these things are going to be other things, right? For example, interoperability, how open they are, right? How customizable they are, how well they play with other things. For example, how well they are multimodal, right? Or how well they are capable of using tools, and so you can use them for agentic workflows, things like that. So I think we are kind of seeing this trend now that is pointing to this kind of commoditization that I think it's very, 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 very interesting, and it's also obviously changing the economics of it all, right, to the benefit of the user. Because if you used to have to pay $200 a month for a thinking model at a certain level, now you're getting by with just a few dollars. That's obviously a big gain. So there's also this kind of compression of the timeline. So it's kind of it's a very, very interesting time of fast development, but we are also reaching a kind of a saturation point in the performance and in the cost that is landing us in a very interesting point of very high performance and very low cost.
Yeah, and that is actually very exciting, that trend in the drop in the cost, because I'm hoping that, as I was mentioning, that more people are able to get involved, because I feel like now the technology is being driven by, as you mentioned, the commoditization, about enterprise, which nothing is wrong, that's fine. Business, finance, revenue, that's like, where the emphasis is right now. And that usually drives a lot of the innovation. But hopefully, as the cost goes down and more people can get involved, that don't have the cost, don't have the funds, the resources, that then we can apply the models to more, I want to say, issues that are important to everyone, like real problems, not just like how you can sell more products, or I don't know, but like some of the real challenges that we have in the world, of lack of resources in some areas, or some people, some areas of the world, are still left without education or even food, or all of these things. I feel like AI is a great tool to be to help solve those problems, but of course the resources is a challenge. But as it goes down, hopefully more people can get involved and start using it, and then we can have some solutions outside of the business world.
Yeah, it reminds me of when Sebastian Thrun started Udacity. His mission was to democratize AI education, right? And he was so early. He was so ahead, like, I don't know, 10 plus years later, here we are. So I do feel like yes, we're improving accessibility, and we're getting this technology into the hands of more people, cheaper. And I think even when ChatGPT first came out, that was a lot of people's kind of, fear, was that you're going to have a huge digital divide of people with access to these models and this tech, and then the people who just don't, right? So if you think, oh, I'm going to school and someone can use this reasoning model to solve problems and help create things and build things, and I don't have access to that, then, it's kind of an advantage, right? So I do agree the accessibility is exciting, and hopefully that trend continues through 2025 for sure. So if you are pursuing more learning in this area, what like skills or areas of expertise do you think will matter most in the industry in light of DeepSeek? I feel like I've focused on a lot of agents in the last few months, and like, applications. But now suddenly, like, hardware is interesting, model optimization, this kind of other types of engineering. What do you think are some other areas that people can start learning about, or exploring, how to become experts in, that you think will benefit them in the future, or, open up, opportunities and in work?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think the first thing to say is that we are now, and we've been probably there for quite a bit of time, at a point where it's not possible for one single person to know everything about all of these things, right? And so it matters a lot where you want to go, right? So who you want to be, right? What kind of job you want to do, or what kind of thing you want to build, or because that determines what you are better be learning right now, right? So I think we are seeing this already, and this is going to accelerate. There's quite a bit of specialization going on, right? So I mentioned that when you look at DeepSeek, right? DeepSeek is clearly the work of a team, right? Because you have the researchers working at the high level on the architecture, on the design of the different stages of the pipeline, right? Things like that. Then you have clearly some very good managers that manage the whole thing, including human labelers and hardware infrastructure, things like that. And then you have the engineers working at the software level, on the training code overall, but also on these very super specialized kernels on the GPUs, and not just any GPU, those GPUs like the ones they have access to. So super specialized on a very, very small kind of area, but very deep in that area, right? So you're going to have this kind of, it's definitely now, and it's been for a while, a kind of a team exercise. So it's important to understand where you want to fit in this team, right? Because what you want to pursue, it's going to be very different depending on where you want to fit, right? And so if you think about these figures that I mentioned, researcher, then I would say model developers and application or product developer, right? So I would say also numerically, I think it's almost a funnel where you have, a lot of people right now, and this is a very good thing, they can be application developers, like they can find applications for these technologies, leverage these tools at a high level by using APIs or using all of these tools that we mentioned, right? Without necessarily needing to know every single little detail of how these things work, right? But know the tools, know the kind of the science of it, like how to prompt, how to chain things together, which model to choose, right? This kind of high level, wide kind of skill set, right? And these are going to be the application developers, and there's so much to do here, right? The technology is now pretty mature, so I mean, in many ways. So there are many applications that are out there that nobody's doing right now. So there's a lot to do here, right? And the skill that you need here is you need a high level overview of how the technology works, but you need to go into like the tooling that you have available to you. What are the different platforms, also kind of the product kind of development type of thing, right? How do you develop a product around these technologies? So this type of kind of skill, right? Then you can go to the second level, which is a little bit deeper, which is the people that are developing these models. And now this can go all the way from people fine-tuning these models, right, to people actually developing new new models, like training them from scratch or even new architectures, right? So there's a whole spectrum here, and at the fine-tuning level, right, these days it's not that hard to do, and there are these technologies that are called parameter efficient fine-tuning, for example, LoRa or QLoRa, these type of technologies. These are tool set that you want to have and you want to know, because this is what allows you to specialize a generic model to your use case. And so in the funnel, these are less people, right? But it's still a relatively large opportunity in terms of numbers, right? And people who are going to do this. So this is, if you are more into the technology at a deeper level, this is probably very interesting kind of intermediate level to be in, right? Where you know enough about the technology and you're curious enough about the technology to be able to do these things. So fine-tune the models and understand the developments and the innovations and so on and so forth. And then there is the deeper level, which is the level of the researcher on one end and of the software engineer working on the 50,000 GPU cluster, right? Obviously the skills that you need there are very different. If you're talking about the software person working on the cluster, on the efficiency of the cluster, the communication, the multi-node training, these type of things, right? That's a very hard skill type of thing, very hard engineering software thing, right? On parallel computing and CUDA and hardware and all of those things, right? And then on the other hand, you have the researcher, right, which definitely needs these other people to work, but also works at a little bit of a higher level about, the theory behind it, the architecture and the new optimization methods and so on and so forth. And this is a much more scientific kind of preparation where you need, math, algebra, and also just machine learning and deep learning overall. So there's a whole host of figures in this world, and there's probably space for everyone, but you need to figure out where you want to fit.
Yeah, I would take Giacomo's funnel and turn it this way in terms of a spectrum, right? So you have on one end the software engineers and the scientists, who do the hardcore research, and they like he says, they work with the processors, the CUDA and all that. That is something that you may be interested in. And on the other extreme will be the people who are taking already built models and maybe customizing them, right? And so you can figure out where you want to be on that spectrum. But one of the things I think would be like something more immediate, think in terms of what you do already right now, what area of work or study or practice you're in, and start thinking about how can I incorporate AI into my workflow? How can AI help me do what I do better, faster, more efficiently, and start learning how to work with the AI to do like the prompting, or how you set up the workflow for your agents or whatever. You start figuring out how you can do that now, because you're already an expert in that area, whether you're a teacher or a nurse or an administrative assistant or a marketing manager, whatever it is you do. Figure out how it is I can do my job better with AI and start learning from there. And you may want to start getting deeper, or maybe even figure out, you know what, I'll leave this to someone else. But, just start figuring that out, basic, figuring that how you can make that happen. And then exploring a little bit about what is AI? What does it mean? What is machine learning? Learning some basic Python so you have a better understanding of how the model does what it does, so you can get more out of it. And that will give you a good starting point for you to then decide if you want to go this way or that way in terms of the technology. But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I've done a lot of data engineering curriculum, and I see a lot of parallels with like distributed data processing, and now you can do distributed training. So I think there's some skills that even if you had those in a different area of tech, that you can now bring to this field and apply them. And it's very cool to see us leverage these kind of innovations, in like high performance computing and scalability for this area. And I think if we hadn't, done those things in the past, we probably wouldn't, be able to do these things now. So I think there's also a huge opportunity for kind of tech career changers and shifters here. We have about 7 minutes left, and we have some audience questions. So one of the questions was, can you talk about the distilled variants? I think, Giacomo, I heard you mention them, the distilled variants that can run on lesser hardware. And how do those distilled models relate to the full DeepSeek R1 model?
Yeah, so imagine that so you have this algorithm that is called distillation, right? And you can imagine it like this. You have a teacher model that is the very big model that was very expensive to train, and it's very large and very expensive to run, right? And then you have these other smaller models, right? The smaller models, if they learn from scratch on the same data set of the larger model, they will perform significantly worse because they have less capacity to learn, right? And so the distillation is the idea that you have the large model learn first, and then instead of having the small models learn from the data set of the larger model, they learn directly from the larger model, right? And the larger model, in this case of O1, there is a very interesting thing, which is R1, sorry. R1 has this chain of thought, right? So the small model sees not only the answer to the question, but also the chain of thought that the large model has developed to arrive to that question. And so it can learn from the larger model not only what the answer is, but also how to get there, right? And so with this distillation process, you can go from this R1, which has over 400 billion parameters, is just gigantic, right? You can go to, for example, the 72 billion version, right? Which is still a big model, right? But it's much, much smaller than the original. And this 72 billion is almost as good as the very big one, right? And this 72 billion version, you can deploy on 2 GPUs, right? So if you have two 24 gigabytes GPUs, you can use this model there, right? And so this would be a machine that on the cloud will cost you a few dollars per hour. So it's not zero, but it's definitely attainable, right? But then you can go from this 72 billion model, you can go to the 9 billion model, right? And now you lose a little bit of performance, but not nearly as much as you would if you were to train this 9 billion from scratch. And so now this 9 billion parameter model, you can run on consumer GPU, one GPU, right? And so through this process, you can make smaller and smaller models that can run on smaller and smaller hardware, but they retain so much more performance from the large one than if they were to be trained from scratch. And then people take these smaller models that are more manageable and fine-tune them for specific applications. Very few people have the hardware necessary to take the big R1 model and fine-tune it, right? But a lot more people have resources to take the second one or the third one or the fourth one. And so you have this kind of funnel that opens up where for the very small models, you have thousands of them because a lot of people have the opportunity to do that. And so they fine-tune that model to a specific data set and then they release it. I hope that answers the question.
Another question we have is, will DeepSeek be able to replicate O3 as well from OpenAI, or does OpenAI still have a real quote unquote moat?
I think it's going to be a case of continuous innovation from all the parties, not just DeepSeek and OpenAI, because all of the companies that are building models are always trying to upmanship with the other. So every new advancement by one company is challenged to the other company to try and do something better. So I think right now, even now, the DeepSeek and not just DeepSeek, but they're all looking at ways that they can release a better model than O3. And of course, OpenAI, they're saying that they're already using the next version of the reasoning model in-house, and they will soon release it. So the AI arms race is on and popping, and we are here for it.
Yeah, I need that O3 full model because the mini one's just not doing it for me. It's just
I do too. Yeah, I know.
I keep going back to the O1.
Yeah, it was like a tease. That's not really.
Yeah. And then I think we have maybe time for one more question. Is the underlying architecture different? You probably have 1 minute to answer.
Yeah, so the underlying architecture is a mixture of expert architecture where you have it's a sparse model, right? It means that whenever it's doing inference, only a few of the weights are actually being used and need to be loaded on the GPU. And this is a technology that has been there for a while, and it's been used also by other famous open source models like Mistral, for example, right? It was one of the first open source open weight model that used a mixture of expert. It's also thought to be the technology behind GPT-4o, but nobody knows because OpenAI never confirmed it. But so it's a mixture of expert architecture, and this is not necessarily that novel. However, there are details about it that are pretty novel. There is a new, a little bit changed attention mechanism in it that DeepSeek published as part of their V3 paper back in December. So that's an innovation. And then there are also these other, they are not really architecture thing. Well, the other thing that I would mention about the architecture is this thing that I said before. They do multi-token prediction during training. And that this changes a few things in the architecture, but these things are discarded at inference, right? It's a trick to train better. It's not used at inference time. But then the other innovations are not so much in the architecture of the model, but they are in the training pipeline. How do you actually train it? How do you optimize it?
I think that's all we have time for today. So thanks for joining us. We hope you uncovered some valuable insights during the discussion. I know I did. For a limited time, we are offering all webinar attendees a 50% discount on Udacity. Just use the code DeepSeek50, all one word, / words and letters or numbers, DeepSeek50 at checkout. So you're welcome to share this code with others, and we'll send more information about this offer over email in the next couple days. So thanks everyone for joining us. It was super fun, and we'll see you for the next one.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.